Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Right now, as you're listening to my voice, there are approximately 86 billion neurons firing inside your skull. 86 billion. That's more than 10 times the number of stars in our entire galaxy, all contained in the 3 pounds of tissue sitting between your ears. And here's what keeps me awake at night, or rather, what helps me fall asleep with wonder. Each one of those neurons can form up to 10,000 connections with other neurons. That means your brain, your beautiful, mysterious brain, contains more possible connections than there are atoms in the known universe. You are, quite literally, carrying infinity inside your head. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, I want you to feel the absolute marvel of that. Because understanding your brain isn't just about science. It's about understanding the most intimate mystery of your existence. It's about realizing that every thought you've ever had, every memory you cherish, every person you've loved, every dream that's made you wake up crying or laughing, all of it happens in this dark, quiet space that you've never seen and never will. Your brain is the universe experiencing itself. And tonight, we're going to explore its most beautiful mysteries together, not to master them, but to fall asleep in absolute awe of them. I'm here with you now, in this quiet moment, because I believe there's something profoundly comforting about mystery. We live in a world that demands answers, that wants everything explained, optimized and solved, but your brain, this magnificent 3-pound universe, reminds us that some of the most beautiful things in existence are the ones we're still learning to understand. And there's peace in that. There's rest in that. So tonight I'm not here to teach you how to hack your brain or optimize your neural pathways. I'm here to help you fall in love with the mystery, to help you drift into sleep while contemplating the absolute wonder of consciousness itself. Because when you truly understand, or rather, when you truly appreciate what you don't understand about your brain, everything changes. The way you see yourself changes. The way you forgive yourself changes. The way you marvel at every single ordinary moment of your existence changes. Let me tell you why this matters so much to me, and why I think it'll matter to you too. For years I struggled with this strange kind of disconnection from myself. Have you ever felt that? Like you're living inside your own head, but you don't really know what's happening in there? I'd make decisions I didn't understand. I'd feel emotions that seemed to come from nowhere. I'd remember things wrong, forget things that mattered, and wonder why my mind seemed to work against me sometimes. I felt like a stranger in my own consciousness. And then I started learning about the brain. Not in a clinical way, not memorizing parts and functions like I was studying for a test, but really learning, really wondering, really sitting with the mystery of it all. And something shifted. I started to see myself differently. I started to understand that I wasn't broken or strange. I was just human. And being human means carrying around this impossibly complex, beautifully imperfect, absolutely miraculous organ that's doing its best to make sense of a complicated world. Your brain is trying so hard for you. Right now, even as you're relaxing, even as you're preparing for sleep, it's working. It's filtering millions of pieces of sensory information every single second, deciding what you need to pay attention to and what you can safely ignore. It's regulating your heartbeat, your breathing, your body temperature. It's processing emotions, consolidating memories, and preparing itself for the restoration that comes with sleep. And it's doing all of this without you having to think about it, without you having to try. That's what I want you to feel tonight. Not just information about your brain, but genuine appreciation for it, genuine awe. Because when you fall asleep feeling grateful for your own consciousness, something beautiful happens. You sleep deeper, you dream richer, you wake up with a different relationship to yourself. So let's begin this journey together. Let's explore the mysteries that make you who you are. And let's do it slowly, gently, with the kind of wonder that makes falling asleep feel like falling in love with existence itself. The first thing you need to know about your brain is that it's essentially hallucinating your reality right now, and I mean that in the most beautiful way possible. Everything you see, everything you hear, everything you touch and taste and smell, it's all a construction. Your brain is taking raw sensory data, electrical signals and chemical reactions, and it's painting a picture of the world for you. It's creating the movie of your life, frame by frame, moment by moment. Think about color for a second. The colors you see don't actually exist out there in the world. What exists are electromagnetic waves vibrating at different frequencies. Your eyes detect these frequencies, and your brain translates them into the experience of red, blue, yellow, green. The sunset you watched last week, the one that made you stop and stare, that brilliant orange and pink painted across the sky, that was your brain's interpretation. That was your brain giving you a gift, translating wavelengths into wonder. And here's what makes this even more mysterious. My red might not be the same as your red. We've agreed to call a certain frequency red, but the actual experience of redness, the qual as philosophers call it, that subjective experience might be completely different for each of us. We'll never know. We can't climb into each other's consciousness and compare. We are each living in our own private universe, constructed moment by our brains. When I first really understood this, really felt it, I was sitting in my apartment at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, staring at a blue wall, and I suddenly realized that this blue, this particular shade that I was seeing, was being created inside my skull. The wall was just reflecting certain wavelengths of light, but the blueness of it, the experience of it, that was all happening in the dark theater of my brain, and I started crying. Not sad tears, but tears of absolute wonder, because I realized that every beautiful thing I'd ever seen, every face I'd loved, every place that had felt like home, all of it was this intimate creation, this gift my brain had been giving me my entire life. Your brain is an artist, and your reality is its masterpiece. And it's painting this masterpiece in complete darkness. Your skull is a sealed chamber. No light gets in there. No sound penetrates it. Your brain has never directly experienced the outside world. Everything it knows about reality comes filtered through your senses, translated into electrochemical signals, patterns of neurons firing in sequence. And from this indirect information, this second-hand data, your brain constructs everything. Your entire lived experience. The taste of coffee in the morning. The sound of someone you love laughing. The feeling of grass under your bare feet. All of it constructed in darkness, painted with electricity and chemistry. This is why hallucinations are so interesting, so revealing, because they show us that our normal perception is already a kind of controlled hallucination. Your brain is constantly predicting what should be out there based on past experience, and then checking those predictions against incoming sensory data. When the predictions match the data closely enough, you experience normal perception. When there's a mismatch, when the predictions override the data, that's when you get illusions and hallucinations. But here's the beautiful part. This means your brain isn't passively receiving reality. It's actively creating your experience of reality. It's using your memories, your expectations, your emotions, your beliefs, everything that makes you uniquely you, to construct this moment right now. Two people can be in the exact same room, receiving the same sensory information, and have completely different experiences of that room, because their brains are painting different pictures based on different histories, different context, different internal states. This is why trauma can change how you perceive the world, why depression can make colors seem duller, food taste bland, why falling in love can make everything seem brighter, more vibrant, more alive. It's not just a metaphor. Your emotional state literally changes how your brain constructs reality. Your feelings are part of the painting process. They're like filters that change the hue and saturation of your experience. And this is also why mindfulness practices can be so powerful. Because when you start paying attention to your experience, when you start noticing how your brain is constructing your reality moment by moment, you gain a kind of freedom. You realize that your experience of reality isn't fixed. It's flexible. It's being created right now, and you have some influence over that creation. Not complete control, because so much of it is automatic, unconscious, but influence. You can shift your attention. You can question your predictions. You can notice when your brain is painting with old colors, old patterns that don't serve you anymore. I remember working with someone once who had terrible anxiety about public speaking. Every time they had to give a presentation, their brain would construct a reality where everyone in the audience was judging them, hating them, waiting for them to fail. And this constructed reality felt absolutely true to them. Their palms would sweat, their heart would race, their voice would shake, because their brain was predicting danger, and it was creating an experience that matched that prediction. But here's what we discovered together. When they started to understand that their brain was constructing this reality, that it was a prediction based on past experiences and not an objective truth, something shifted. They could start to question the construction. They could notice when their brain was painting with fear, and they could gently ask it to try different colors. Not positive thinking, not pretending the anxiety wasn't there, but genuine curiosity about whether this constructed reality was the only possibility. and slowly over time their brain started constructing different realities during presentations. Realities where some people in the audience were interested, where some were neutral, where maybe a few weren't paying attention because they were thinking about their own lives. More complex realities, more accurate realities. And the fear didn't disappear completely, but it lost its grip, because they understood that it was part of the construction process, not an objective feature of reality itself. This is the power of understanding how your brain creates your experience. It doesn't give you control, but it gives you relationship. You can start to work with your brain instead of feeling trapped by it. You can appreciate its efforts to protect you, to predict the world for you, even when those efforts sometimes create suffering. You can thank it for trying so hard, and then gently guide it toward constructions that serve you better. As you're lying here now, preparing for sleep, notice your experience. Notice the sounds you're hearing, the sensations in your body, the thoughts drifting through your mind. And remember that all of this is being constructed for you, painted in real time by billions of neurons working in darkness. Your brain is creating this moment of rest for you. It's giving you this experience of relaxation, of letting go, of drifting. And there's something so beautiful about that. You're not fighting your way to sleep. You're allowing your brain to construct sleep for you, to paint dreams that will help you process and restore. This is the first mystery, the mystery of constructed reality. The mystery that you are living inside a painting that's being created by the artist inside your skull, moment by moment, brushstroke by brushstroke. And when you really feel this, when you really understand it, you realize that you've never been separate from the world. You've never been looking at reality from the outside. You've always been inside the creative process. You've always been part of the art. Let me tell you about memory, because this might be the most beautiful and most heartbreaking mystery of all. Every memory you have, every single one, is being reconstructed every time you remember it. And in that reconstruction, it changes. Your memories aren't like video files stored perfectly in some mental hard drive. They're more like stories that get retold, and with each retelling, details shift, emphasis changes, emotions blend and blur. When something happens to you, your brain encodes it as a memory by creating a pattern of connections between neurons. But here's the thing. When you remember that event, you're not accessing the original pattern. You're reconstructing it, building it again from fragments, filling in gaps with expectations and current feelings and all the times you've remembered this memory before. And then, when you stop actively remembering, your brain re-encodes this new version. So the memory you have now isn't the memory you had 5 years ago, even if you think it is. It's been edited, revised, rewritten by your own consciousness over time. I have this memory of my grandfather. I'm maybe 7 years old, and we're sitting on his porch in the summer, and he's teaching me about constellations. I can see the scene so clearly. The wooden planks of the porch slightly rough under my legs, the smell of tobacco from his pipe, the way he pointed up at the stars with his weathered hand, tracing invisible lines between points of light. His voice, deep and patient, telling me the story of Orion the hunter. But here's what I know now. I don't know how much of that memory is real. I don't know if it was summer or spring. I don't know if the porch actually looked like I remember it, or if I've imported details from photos I've seen or other porches I've visited over the years. But the feeling I remember perfectly. That strange mixture of comfort and unease. The way the adults' laughter would rise and fall. The way I could be completely present and also thinking about something else entirely, already developing that split consciousness that becomes so familiar later. The observer and the observed, the person in the moment and the person watching themselves be in the moment. I think that's when it starts. That doubling, that sense of being slightly outside your own experience even as you're having it. You ever notice how children don't do that? How they're just completely unself-consciously asterisk their asterisk. Watch a kid really playing, not performing play for adults, and they're just absorbed, dissolved into the thing. There's no narration running, no self-monitoring, no wondering how they look or what they'll remember, or whether this counts as a good childhood. And then something shifts, gradually probably, though it can feel sudden when you look back, and suddenly you're aware of being aware. You're conscious of your consciousness. You're not just experiencing the porch in the evening, and the voices are experiencing yourself experiencing them. And once that starts, it never really stops. I remember the first time I was aware of trying to memorize a moment. I must have been 7 or 8. I was in the back seat of the car at night, and we were driving somewhere, and the streetlights were making patterns across the ceiling of the car, and I remember thinking very deliberately, I want to remember this, and I do remember it, or I remember remembering it, or I remember the decision to remember it, which has now become the memory itself. The content has been replaced by the container. It's like that old thought experiment about the ship. If you replace every plank, every nail, every piece of rope over time, is it still the same ship? Are my memories still my memories if every time I recall them, I'm changing them slightly, reinforcing certain neural pathways while others fade, adding a detail here, smoothing over an inconsistency there? Sometimes I wonder if we become less reliable narrators of our own lives the older we get. Not because our memories fail, though they do, but because we've told ourselves our own stories so many times that we've perfected them, made them make sense, given them shape and arc and meaning that probably wasn't there in the actual living of them. The truth is messier than the story. But maybe that messiness is where the real wisdom lives, not in the polished lesson, but in the uncertainty that came before it, in the weeks I spent not knowing what to do, in the contradictory advice I received, in the moments I second-guessed myself even after I'd already committed. We fetishize clarity. We want the guru on the mountaintop to hand us the answer. We want the 5-step framework, the actionable takeaway, the hack that changes everything overnight. And there's comfort in that. Structure feels like safety. But life doesn't arrive with chapter breaks. It doesn't pause for reflection. It keeps moving, keeps demanding decisions before you're ready, keeps throwing variables at you that weren't in any playbook you studied. I think about the people I know who seem most at peace with themselves. And what they have in common isn't that they figured everything out. It's that they made peace with not figuring everything out. They stopped waiting for permission from some future version of themselves who had it all together. They started living as rough drafts, not recklessly, not without thought, but with the understanding that waiting for perfect clarity is just another form of paralysis, that sometimes you have to move in the fog and trust that the path will reveal itself with each step, not before you take them. There's a kind of arrogance in thinking we need to have it all figured out before we begin, like we're so special that the rules of gradual learning don't apply to us, like everyone else got a manual we somehow missed. The truth nobody tells you, everyone is improvising. The people who look like they have it together are just better at hiding the uncertainty, or they've accepted it as part of the process instead of evidence of failure. I used to think confidence meant having no doubts. Now I think it means having doubts and moving anyway, not because you've eliminated the fear, but because you've stopped letting it be the deciding vote, the gap between who you are and who you want to be. It doesn't close because you finally figure yourself out. It closes because you start taking action before you feel ready. And then you do it again and again, until one day you look back and realize you've become someone you didn't know you were capable of being. That's the beautiful irony of personal growth. We spend so much time searching for this grand moment of transformation, this lightning bolt revelation that will change everything. But transformation doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It whispers, it accumulates. It happens in the margins of ordinary days. You know what nobody tells you about becoming better? It's not always upward. Some days you'll feel like you've regressed. You'll snap at someone you love. You'll fall back into an old pattern you thought you'd outgrown. And in that moment you'll think, see? I haven't changed at all. I'm still the same broken person I've always been. But that's not regression. That's just being human. The difference now is that you notice. You feel the dissonance between who you're becoming and what you just did. That discomfort, that's not failure. That's your new standard rejecting your old behavior. Your consciousness is expanded, even if your actions occasionally lag behind. Think of it like learning a language. There will be days when you're fluent, when the words flow without effort. And there will be days when you can't remember the simplest phrase, when your tongue feels thick and your brain foggy. But even on those days, you know more than you did when you started. The knowledge is there. It's just temporarily inaccessible. Personal growth works the same way. You don't lose progress just because you have a bad day. You're building a new operating system, and sometimes the old one boots up out of habit. The key is not to panic, not to interpret one setback as total failure, not to throw away months of growth because of one moment of weakness. This is where self-compassion becomes crucial. And I don't mean the shallow kind, the participation trophy version that excuses every mistake. I mean the deep kind. The kind that says, I see what happened, I understand why it happened, and I'm committed to doing better next time. Not from a place of shame, but from a place of genuine care for who you're becoming. Because here's something most people miss. You can't hate yourself into a better version of yourself. Shame is not a sustainable fuel for transformation. You can only love yourself into it. You can only grow from a foundation of acceptance. And I know that sounds counterintuitive to some people. They think, if I accept where I am, won't I just stay here? Won't I become complacent? But acceptance isn't resignation. Acceptance is acknowledging reality without the layers of judgment and story we pile on top of it. It's the difference between saying, I ate more than I intended and I feel uncomfortable versus I'm a worthless piece of garbage with no self-control who will never change. One of those statements is true. One of those statements is violence. And here's the thing about that voice, that harsh inner critic that shows up after mistakes it doesn't actually belong to you. Not originally. That voice was taught to you. Maybe it sounds like a parent who was disappointed when you didn't meet their expectations. Maybe it sounds like a coach who thought shame was motivation. Maybe it sounds like a culture that profits from your self-hatred, that sells you solutions to problems it convinced you that you had. But you can unlearn it. You can choose a different voice. Not a voice that makes excuses or denies responsibility, but a voice that tells the truth with compassion. A voice that says, yes, this happened and I'm still worthy, and I can make a different choice next time. Because the goal isn't perfection. The goal isn't never making mistakes. The goal is reducing the time between the mistake and the return. The goal is shortening that gap between when you fall and when you get back up. Think about it like a wave. You're going to get knocked down. That's guaranteed. The ocean doesn't care about your plans or your discipline or how well you did yesterday. But you can learn to recover faster. You can learn to not spend 3 days underwater, tumbling in the current, before you remember which way is up. You can practice the return. And that's what self-compassion gives you. It gives you speed. It gives you resilience. Because here's what nobody tells you about self-compassion. It's not actually soft. It's structurally efficient. It's the difference between a building that collapses in an earthquake and one that sways and stays standing. The rigid structure cracks. The compassionate one absorbs the shock and returns to center. When you beat yourself up, you're adding a second injury on top of the first one. You fail at something that's injury 1. Then you tell yourself you're worthless because you failed, that's injury 2. Now you're not just dealing with the original problem. You're dealing with shame, with diminished self-worth, with the energy drain of self-attack. You've turned a clean wound into an infected one. Self-compassion stops that cascade. It says, yes, this hurts. Yes, I made a mistake, and I'm still here. I still deserve care. It's triage for your inner life. And let me be clear, self-compassion doesn't mean lowering your standards. It doesn't mean you stop trying or give yourself a pass on everything. That's a fundamental misunderstanding. In fact, research shows that people who practice self-compassion actually have higher standards than self-critics. They just don't weaponize those standards against themselves. Think about it. If you have a coach who screams at you every time you miss a shot, tells you you're garbage, that you'll never improve, how motivated are you? How open are you to taking risks, to trying the difficult play? You're not. You're defensive. You're afraid. You play small. But if you have a coach who says, that didn't work. What can we learn? Let's try again. You're willing to stretch. You're willing to fail forward, because failure isn't an indictment of your existence. It's information. Self-compassion is choosing to be the second coach for yourself. And when you do that consistently, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing your own mind. You stop walking on eggshells around your own inner voice. And that liberated energy, that's what you redirect toward actual growth. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because once you stop that internal argument, you start to notice something subtle but profound. The people around you treat you differently. Not because you announced some grand transformation. Not because you posted about it or declared it in some big moment. But because your energy shifted, and people feel that. Think about someone you know who's constantly defending themselves, always explaining, always justifying their choices, their lifestyle, their path. There's a tension there, right? You can feel it. It's exhausting to be around. Not because their choices are wrong, but because the energy of self-defense is draining. It leaks into every conversation. Every interaction becomes about proving something. Now think about someone who's just solid. They know who they are. They're not advertising it. They're not defending it. They just exist in it. That person, you relax around them because they're relaxed in themselves. There's no performance, no need to convince, just presence. That's what happens when you stop arguing with yourself. You become that second person, And the people who need you to be uncertain, who feed off your self-doubt, who require your confusion to feel superior, they drift away, not through conflict, not through confrontation, just through natural selection. Your new frequency doesn't match theirs anymore, and yeah, that can feel lonely at first, because you might lose people you thought were friends. You might lose family members you were close to, or at least lose the version of the relationship you had. But here's what nobody tells you. That loneliness is temporary. It's a transition phase. What comes next is connection on a completely different level, because you start attracting people who operate from that same place of internal certainty, people who aren't trying to convince you of anything, who aren't looking for you to validate their choices, people who just are. And those relationships, they're effortless. Not perfect, but effortless. There's no hidden agenda, no power struggle, no constant negotiation of worth, just the reality that you already have value, and that space honors it without making you prove it over and over again. And maybe that's the real luxury we're not talking about enough. Not expensive things, not perfect relationships, but the luxury of not having to perform your worth every single day, the luxury of rest that doesn't come with guilt attached, the luxury of being average on a Tuesday and having that be completely acceptable. We've built entire identities around achievement, around being needed, around solving problems and showing up and pushing through. And those things aren't bad, but when they become the only way we know how to exist, when rest feels like failure and stillness feels like stagnation, that's when we realize we've been running on a treadmill that someone else built, at a speed someone else set, toward a finish line that keeps moving further away. Space lets you step off, not forever, not even for that long sometimes, but long enough to remember what it feels like to just breathe without counting it as productivity. Long enough to remember that you're more than your output, more than your utility, more than how much you can carry before you break. I think about the friendships that require constant maintenance. The ones where if you don't text back immediately, there's tension. Where every interaction needs to be meaningful, deep, emotionally available. Those friendships aren't wrong, but they're exhausting when there's no balance. The friendships that have space built in, those are the ones where you can disappear for 3 months and come back and pick up exactly where you left off. No apologies needed. No lengthy explanations about where you've been or why you went quiet. Just, hey, good to hear from you, want to grab coffee? That kind of trust doesn't come from constant contact. It comes from understanding that people have lives, have seasons, have moments where they need to turn inward, and that it's not personal. It's just human. And when you can give people that space, something shifts in you too. You stop carrying this low-level anxiety about whether you're doing enough, showing up enough, being present enough. You start to understand that relationships aren't measured in frequency. They're measured in quality, in honesty, in the ability to pick up where you left off without resentment or guilt hanging in the air. I think that's one of the quiet gifts of getting older. You realize that not every relationship needs to be fed daily to survive. Some friendships are like succulents. They don't need constant watering. They're built to endure dry spells. And when you do reconnect, there's no drought. There's just continuation. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets tricky. Not everyone operates this way. And that's okay too. Some people do need more regular contact. Some people feel loved through consistency, through check-ins, through knowing you're thinking of them even in the small, quiet moments. And if someone in your life tells you that, if they say, hey, I need more from you, that's not them being needy. That's them being honest. The key is knowing which relationships require what, and being honest about what you can give, because pretending you're someone who texts back instantly when you're not, that's exhausting, and it sets everyone up for disappointment. But being upfront, saying, I'm terrible at texting, but I care about you, and I'll always show up when it matters, that's real. That's something people can work with. I had a friend once tell me, I know you disappear sometimes, and I used to take it personally, but now I get it. You're just recharging. And when you come back, you're actually present. And that's worth more to me than 100 surface-level conversations. That conversation changed how I saw myself, because I'd spent so long thinking my need for solitude was a flaw, something I needed to fix or apologize for. But it's not. It's just how I'm wired. And the people who get that, who don't punish me for it, those are my people. So if you're someone who needs space, who goes quiet sometimes, who can't keep up with the constant hum of social expectation, you're not broken. You're not a bad friend. You're just someone who loves differently. And the right people will not only understand that, they'll appreciate it. Because in a world that's always on, always loud, always demanding your attention, being someone who knows when to step back, when to be still, when to let things breathe, that's not absence, that's presence, just a different kind. And sometimes it's in the way the world remembers them without being asked. There's a man I heard about in Oregon who spent 30 years as a school janitor, never made much money, never sought recognition, just showed up every single day, learned every kid's name, asked about their lives. When he died, more than 2,000 people came to his funeral. Students who were now in their 40s, teachers who'd long since retired. They filled the church and spilled into the parking lot. They came because he'd made them feel seen during the most invisible years of their lives. No one voted for him. No one gave him an award. But his presence, the quality of his attention, the consistency of his kindness that shaped more lives than most people in positions of power ever will. That's the thing about real influence. It doesn't need a platform. It doesn't need validation. It works like groundwater, invisible but essential, feeding roots you'll never see. I think about the people who changed my life, and almost none of them know they did it. The teacher who told me I was smart when I felt stupid. The stranger who helped me change a tire in the rain without making me feel inadequate. The friend who just sat with me when sitting was all I needed. They weren't trying to change me. They were just being decent, being present, being human. And that changed everything. Because here's what I've realized. We spend so much time worried about our legacy, about what mark we'll leave, about whether we'll be remembered. We want to matter in some grand, unmistakable way. We want our lives to mean something you could point to and measure. But meaning doesn't work like that. Meaning is the warmth you left in rooms you'll never enter again. It's the courage someone borrowed from watching you try. It's the permission you gave just by being yourself when being yourself felt dangerous. It's smaller than we imagine and bigger than we can measure. And here's what we miss when we're chasing those big, visible moments of impact. The quiet architecture of influence. The way a single conversation can redirect someone's entire internal narrative. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but like adjusting a ship's compass by 1 degree imperceptible in the moment. But over time, it means arriving at a completely different destination. I think about the teacher who didn't say much. She just listened differently than other adults. When I spoke, she didn't interrupt with advice or correction. She let silence sit between us like it had weight, like it deserved respect. She made thinking feel like something worth doing slowly. And somehow, in those pauses, I learned that my thoughts mattered before I polished them. That uncertainty wasn't failure, it was the raw material of understanding. That's legacy, not a lesson she taught, not wisdom she imparted, just the way she held space. And decades later, when I'm with my own children, I catch myself doing it, that same quality of attention. I didn't decide to inherit it. It simply moved through me like water finding its level. We are porous that way. We absorb the emotional temperatures of the rooms we've been in. The patience someone showed us becomes the patience we offer others, often without recognizing the lineage. The cruelty we endured sometimes becomes the cruelty we resist most fiercely in the world, or sometimes, painfully, the cruelty we repeat. We're always passing something forward. The question isn't whether we leave a legacy. The question is, which parts of what we've inherited will we amplify, and which will we choose to let die with us? Because that's the other side of this. Legacy isn't just what we create. It's what we refuse to continue. It's the cycles we consciously break, the patterns we choose not to pass down. I think about my friend Maria, who grew up watching her father work himself into exhaustion, equating his worth entirely with his productivity. She watched him miss birthdays, skip vacations, postpone joy until some mythical later that never quite arrived. And when he retired, he didn't know who he was anymore. The identity he'd built for 40 years was suddenly irrelevant. Maria could have inherited that same script. She could have told herself that's just what dedication looks like. That's what it means to be responsible. Instead, she made a different choice. She works hard, yes, but she also leaves the office at 5:30 most days. She takes her vacation time. She tucks her kids in at night and actually remembers the conversations they have in the dark. When her father comments about her not being as committed as he was, she just smiles, because she knows something he's only now beginning to understand. The best gift she can give her children isn't a perfect work ethic. It's a whole parent. That's legacy too. The deliberate decision to say, this pattern ends with me. Maybe it's breaking cycles of silence around mental health. Maybe it's refusing to perpetuate the idea that vulnerability is weakness. Maybe it's teaching your children that rest isn't laziness, that asking for help isn't failure, that changing your mind isn't betrayal. These aren't dramatic moments that anyone will applaud. There's no award ceremony for choosing therapy over stoicism, no medal for being the first person in your family to say, "I don't know," and that's okay. But these quiet rebellions ripple forward in ways we can't fully measure. Your great-grandchild might never know your name, but they might grow up in a family where people actually talk about their feelings, where it's safe to fail, where love isn't conditional on perfection. That's your doing. Not because you built something everyone could see, but because you refused to rebuild the walls that once confined you. And that's where the real transformation becomes visible, not just to you, but to anyone who's been watching your life unfold. They might not understand what changed. They might ask what you did differently, expecting some grand gesture or dramatic reinvention, but you'll struggle to explain it in a way that satisfies them. Because the truth is, you didn't do something, you stopped doing something. You stopped performing your life for an audience that was never really there. You stopped editing your words before they left your mouth, calculating how they'd be received, whether they'd be enough. You stopped carrying the weight of hypothetical disappointments, the ones you imagined people would feel if they saw the real you. This is the part that sounds simple until you realize how much energy you'd been spending on that constant performance. How exhausting it was to maintain that vigilance, that split-screen awareness where half of you lived your life while the other half directed it, stage-managed it, made it presentable. When you stop doing that, something unexpected happens. You don't fall apart. The world doesn't reject you. Instead, you discover that most people weren't watching that closely anyway. They were too busy performing their own lives, managing their own anxieties, convincing themselves they were enough. The few who were watching, really watching, those people notice something different now. Not what you're doing, but what you're not doing. You're not apologizing for taking up space. You're not diminishing your achievements to make others comfortable. You're not laughing at jokes that aren't funny or agreeing with opinions you don't hold. You're just there, fully present, not hiding, not performing, just existing in your own skin without constant commentary on whether you're doing it right. And here's what nobody tells you about that shift. It makes other people uncomfortable at first, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your refusal to perform reminds them of their own performance. Your ease in your own skin highlights their dis-ease in theirs. Some people will pull away. They'll say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. What they mean is, you've stopped playing the role I needed you to play in my story. You've stopped being the person I could feel better than, or the person who made me feel needed, or the person whose struggles made mine seem smaller. Let them go. Not with anger or resentment, but with understanding. You've spent so much of your life building your identity around what you do for others. The helper, the fixer, the one who shows up. And there's beauty in that real beauty. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that relationships are supposed to be mutual. That love isn't measured by how much you can withstand. That being there for someone doesn't mean disappearing yourself. The people who truly value you won't require you to shrink. They won't need you to stay small so they can feel big. They won't build their confidence on the foundation of your insecurity. Real connection doesn't ask you to constantly prove your worth through sacrifice. Think about the relationships in your life that feel easy. Not boring, not superficial, but easy in the sense that you can be yourself. You don't have to rehearse conversations. You don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. You don't walk away feeling drained or confused or somehow less than you were before. Those relationships exist because both people are showing up as themselves, without agenda, without keeping score. Now think about the ones that exhaust you. The ones where you're always translating your thoughts before you speak. Where you're managing their emotions, anticipating their reactions, making yourself smaller so the interaction stays smooth. Those relationships aren't hard because you're incompatible. They're hard because somewhere, somehow, the balance shifted, and you've been holding up both sides ever since. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people are only in your life because you make it easy for them. You do the reaching out. You do the understanding. You accommodate their schedules, their moods, their needs. And they let you. Not because they're terrible people, but because you've trained them to expect it. You've shown them again and again that you'll be the one who bends. And maybe that worked for a while. Maybe it felt like love, like friendship, like family. But now you're tired. Now you're realizing that you can't remember the last time someone asked how you really are and waited for the real answer. You can't remember the last time someone showed up for you the way you've shown up for them. You've become so good at asking the right questions that you've forgotten how to answer them yourself. Someone says, "How are you?" And the words "I'm fine" come out before you even think about it, before you even check in with yourself to see if it's true. Because that's easier, because the truth is complicated, because the truth might make them uncomfortable. And you can't handle being the source of someone else's discomfort when you've spent your entire life trying to be the source of their relief. You've been carrying other people's emotions for so long that you've forgotten your own are allowed to take up space. Their sadness is valid, their anger is justified, their anxiety is real, but somehow when it's yours it's too much. It's dramatic, it's something you need to get over, work through, handle quietly in the privacy of your own mind, where it won't inconvenience anyone else. You've watched people break down over things that you've endured silently. You've watched them receive comfort and support and validation for struggles that you've never even admitted you're facing, and you don't resent them for it, not really. But there's this voice in the back of your head that wonders why your pain doesn't count the same way, why their crisis requires immediate attention but yours can wait until it's convenient, why their bad day means cancelled plans and gentle understanding, but your bad day means pushing through because people are counting on you. Here's what nobody tells you about being the reliable one. It becomes your identity. It stops being something you do and starts being who you are. And once that happens, once people start seeing you as the person who always has it together, who always knows what to say, who always shows up no matter what, you become trapped in that image. Because if you crack, if you admit you're struggling, if you ask for help, you're not just having a human moment. You're shattering their entire perception of who you are. And that fear, that terror of shattering the image, it creates this feedback loop that makes everything worse. Because now you're not just dealing with your actual problems. You're dealing with the exhausting performance of pretending those problems don't exist. You're managing two realities simultaneously: the messy, complicated truth of what you're actually experiencing, and the polished, curated version you present to everyone else. Think about the mental gymnastics required to maintain that split. You wake up feeling hollow, like there's nothing inside you but static and exhaustion. But you still respond to the morning texts with enthusiasm. You still show up to breakfast with a smile. You still ask everyone else how they're doing. Genuinely interested. Genuinely present. Because that's who you are. That part isn't fake. Your care for others is real. But the cost of that care, when you're already running on empty, is astronomical. And here's what makes it even more insidious: the high-functioning part of you. That part that's always been able to push through starts to turn against you. It becomes a weapon your own mind uses to invalidate your struggle. Because if you can still function, if you can still show up and perform and maintain the appearance of normalcy, then maybe it's not that bad. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe you don't actually need help. Maybe everyone else deals with this and they're not falling apart. So what makes you so special? That voice in your head becomes brutal. It holds you to impossible standards while simultaneously denying that anything is actually wrong. You're simultaneously doing too much and not enough. You're struggling but not in a way that counts. You're exhausted but not in a way that justifies rest. And what makes this particularly cruel is that hustle culture has convinced us that burnout is just another problem to optimize our way out of. There's a meditation app for that. There's a productivity system for that. There's a morning routine that'll fix that. We're told that if we're burning out, we're just not managing our energy correctly. We haven't found the right balance yet. We need better boundaries. We need to work smarter, not harder, as if the problem is our technique and not the unsustainable expectations we've internalized. So we add self-care to the to-do list. We schedule rest like it's another meeting. We track our sleep and monitor our stress levels and gamify our recovery, turning even our downtime into another performance metric to optimize. And when that doesn't work, when we're still exhausted despite the perfect morning routine, still anxious despite the meditation app, still overwhelmed despite the productivity system we assume we're the problem, we're doing self-care wrong. We're not committed enough to our own well-being. We're failing at rest the same way we're failing at work. The real issue isn't that we're bad at self-care. It's that we've been taught to treat the symptoms while the disease keeps spreading. We're putting band-aids on a wound that requires surgery. We're trying to bail water out of a sinking ship instead of asking why there's a hole in the hull. Because here's what hustle culture doesn't want you to realize. You cannot personally optimize your way out of a systemic problem. You cannot individually solution your way out of a culture that fundamentally devalues rest, community, and human limitation. You cannot self-care your way out of an economic system that requires your constant productivity to survive. The exhaustion you feel isn't a personal failing. It's a rational response to irrational demands. The burnout isn't because you're weak. It's because you're human, and humans weren't designed to function as perpetual motion machines in service of endless growth. And here's what makes it especially insidious. The system has convinced us that the solution to burnout is individual. Take a yoga class, practice mindfulness, set boundaries, as if the problem is your inability to manage stress rather than the unmanageable nature of what's being demanded. Don't get me wrong, self-care isn't bad, but when self-care becomes another item on your to-do list, another failure point when you can't squeeze it in between your second job and your third side hustle, it's not liberation. It's just more pressure wearing a wellness mask. The real joke is that the same companies pushing you to the edge are the ones selling you the burnout recovery kit. They'll work you 60 hours a week and then offer you a meditation app subscription. They'll eliminate your pension and then advertise financial wellness seminars. It's like setting someone's house on fire and then selling them a fire extinguisher and congratulating yourself for being part of the solution. Meanwhile, the actual solutions, things like reasonable working hours, living wages, affordable healthcare, accessible childcare, those get dismissed as unrealistic, too expensive, not feasible in today's economy. But somehow there's always money for stock buybacks, always resources for executive compensation packages that could fund entire departments. The priorities reveal everything. When a company says they can't afford to pay workers more, but they can afford $1 billion share repurchase program, they're not describing economic reality. They're describing their values. And what they value isn't your well-being, your family time, or your sanity. It's extraction, maximum output for minimum input. You are not a resource to be strip-mined. You are not a machine that should run until failure. And the exhaustion you feel isn't a personal deficiency, it's a smoke detector going off in a burning building. Your body is trying to tell you something important. This isn't sustainable. This isn't normal. This isn't how human beings are meant to live. And yet, we've built an entire culture around pretending it is. We've normalized the abnormal. We've glamorized exhaustion. We've turned burnout into a badge of honor, as if the person who's most depleted is somehow the most dedicated, the most valuable, the most worthy of respect. Think about the language we use. I'm so busy. We say it with a strange mixture of complaint and pride, like we're overwhelmed, but also important, needed, relevant. I barely slept last night. We announce it like a humble brag, like suffering is proof of significance. I haven't had a day off in weeks. And there's this subtle competition embedded in the statement, isn't there? This unspoken comparison. I'm busier than you. I'm working harder than you. I'm sacrificing more than you. When did we start measuring our worth by our weariness? I remember talking to a friend who works in finance. He told me about a meeting where his manager praised someone for responding to emails at 2 a.m. Not sarcastically, not with concern, with genuine admiration. Like this person's inability to disconnect was something to aspire to. That's when I realized we don't just tolerate this dysfunction, we reward it. We promote the people who work through lunch. We admire the ones who come in sick. We celebrate the employees who cancel vacations when a project needs attention. And what we reward, we replicate. So everyone else looks around and thinks, oh, that's what success looks like. That's the price of admission. If I want to advance, if I want to matter, I need to sacrifice everything else. And slowly, incrementally, we hollow ourselves out. We become efficient machines instead of whole human beings. Productive but not present. Busy but not alive. And here's the cruelest irony. It doesn't even work. All that sacrifice, all that exhaustion, all that relentless grinding, it doesn't actually make us more productive. It makes us less. Study after study confirms what our bodies already know. Overwork decreases performance. Chronic stress impairs decision-making. Sleep deprivation reduces cognitive function more than alcohol intoxication. You wouldn't show up to work drunk, but you'll show up after 4 hours of sleep and think you're fine. You're not fine. Your brain is in a fog. Your reaction time has slowed. Your ability to read social cues, to regulate your emotions, to make rational decisions, all of it is compromised. And the cruelest part, you don't even realize how impaired you are. Sleep deprivation creates a gap between your perceived performance and your actual performance. You think you're functioning at 80%. You're actually functioning at 40, maybe less. Studies show that people who are chronically sleep deprived lose the ability to accurately judge their own cognitive decline. They feel tired, sure, but they genuinely believe they're adapting. They think their body is getting used to less sleep. It's not. Your body never adapts to sleep deprivation. It just gets worse at telling you how bad things are. It's like turning down the volume on your car's warning signals. The check engine light is still on. The problem is still there. You just can't hear the alarm anymore. And here's what that actually costs you. Sleep-deprived people make more errors at work. They're more likely to have accidents on the road, in the workplace, at home. They're more prone to conflicts with colleagues and loved ones because their emotional regulation is shot. One study found that after just 17 hours of sustained wakefulness, your performance is equivalent to having a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. After 24 hours, it's equivalent to 0.1% legally drunk in most places. We've built entire industries around sleep deprivation, shift work, medical residencies, long-haul trucking, the always-on startup culture. We've normalized a form of impairment that we would never tolerate in any other context, and we wonder why burnout is an epidemic, why depression and anxiety rates are skyrocketing, why people feel disconnected from their own lives. You can't think clearly when you're exhausted. You can't feel deeply. You can't connect authentically. You're just going through the motions, running on fumes, telling yourself that this is what adulting looks like. It doesn't have to. Because here's what nobody tells you about rest. It's not the same as leisure, and it's definitely not the same as doing nothing. Rest is active. Rest is intentional. Rest is the difference between a phone that's plugged in and charging versus a phone that's just sitting there, battery slowly draining while 17 apps run in the background. Real rest means shutting down the background apps. It means stopping the constant mental negotiation about what you should be doing instead. It means giving yourself permission to exist without productivity as the price of admission. And here's where it gets complicated, because we've built entire identities around being busy. When someone asks how you're doing, you don't say good. You say busy, like it's a badge of honor. Like the more overwhelmed you are, the more valuable you must be. We've confused motion with progress, exhaustion with importance, and perpetual availability with competence. But think about the people you actually admire, the ones who seem to have their lives together. They're not the ones sprinting through every conversation, checking their phones mid-sentence, apologizing for being a mess. They're the people who seem grounded, present, like they have bandwidth not just for tasks but for actual human connection. Those people aren't superhuman. They've just figured out something you're still learning. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't think clearly with a cluttered mind. They've made peace with the fact that rest isn't something you earn after you've finished everything. Because here's the secret: you're never finished. The to-do list doesn't end. The emails keep coming. There will always be one more thing. So you have to decide, are you going to wait for permission that never comes? Or are you going to give it to yourself? Are you going to keep running until you collapse? Or are you going to build rest into your life like the non-negotiable necessity it actually is? Because your body is keeping score, even when you're not paying attention. And here's what nobody tells you. The collapse doesn't always look like what you expect. You think burnout is going to be this dramatic moment where you fall apart all at once, where everything crashes down in a single spectacular failure. But that's not how it usually happens. Most of the time, burnout is quieter than that. It's the morning you wake up and can't remember why anything mattered. It's the project you used to love that now feels like dragging yourself through concrete. It's looking at your calendar and feeling nothing but dread, or worse, feeling nothing at all. It's the slow fade of your personality. The jokes you used to make don't come as easily. The hobbies you love start feeling like obligations. You stop calling friends back, not because you're too busy, but because you can't imagine having the energy to pretend you're okay. You become a functional ghost, going through the motions of your life, while the person you used to be watches from somewhere far away. And the cruelest part? You might not even notice it's happening, because it doesn't hit all at once. You adjust. You recalibrate your baseline. You tell yourself this is just what adult life feels like, that everyone's exhausted, that this is normal. You compare yourself to people who seem even more burned out and convince yourself you're fine by comparison. But here's the thing about slow erosion. Just because you can't see the damage day by day doesn't mean it's not happening. Water doesn't carve canyons overnight. It takes years of persistent pressure, and then one day you look up and realize how much has been worn away. And maybe you're thinking, okay, but I don't have time to rest. My life doesn't have room for it. I have bills, I have responsibilities, I have people depending on me. And I hear that. I'm not suggesting you abandon your life and move to a monastery. I'm not talking about some luxury retreat or complete lifestyle overhaul that requires resources you don't have. I'm talking about the small spaces, the moments you're already spending in ways that don't serve you, swapping scrolling for stillness, the permission to do less, the radical act of stopping before you're forced to. And that's what this is really asking of you: not to become someone else, not to clear your calendar completely, not to abandon everyone who depends on you. Just to recognize that rest isn't the reward you get after proving yourself. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. You've been taught that self-care is a luxury, something you earn after you've done enough. But what if it's actually the prerequisite? What if all those things you're trying to accomplish, the relationships you want to deepen, the work you want to do well, the patience you wish you had more of, what if they're all on the other side of allowing yourself to rest? Think about your phone battery. You don't wait until it's at 0% to charge it. You don't look at the low battery warning and think, not yet. I haven't earned it. You plug it in because you know a dead phone is useless. Your body works the same way, except it's been sending you low battery warnings for months, maybe years, and you've been dismissing every single notification. The tremor in your hands when you're hungry. The way your vision blurs after too many hours at the screen. The headache that starts behind your eyes every afternoon. The shortness in your tone with people you love. The inability to remember what someone just said because your mind is 6 places at once. These aren't character flaws. They're system alerts. They're your body's version of the red battery icon flashing in the corner of your consciousness, waiting for you to finally pay attention. But somewhere along the way, you learn to be proud of ignoring those warnings, to wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor, to compete in the unspoken Olympics of who's sleeping less, working more, holding it together despite everything. And here's the thing about that competition: nobody actually wins. There's no finish line where someone hands you a medal that says most depleted. There's only the slow erosion of your capacity to feel anything at all. There's a name for this, you know. The Japanese call it *karoshi*, death by overwork. It's a word that shouldn't need to exist, but it does. Because we've created a world where working yourself to death is not just possible, but normalized, expected even. We've somehow convinced ourselves that our worth is measured in output, in deliverables, in how quickly we respond to emails, how many hours we log, how little we need to sustain ourselves, as if being human is a design flaw we're meant to optimize away. But here's what actually happens when you treat yourself like a machine. You break down like one. Your body starts sending signals: headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues, that persistent exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, and you ignore them. You've been trained to ignore them. You pop an ibuprofen, drink another coffee, and keep going. Because stopping feels impossible. Because there's always something urgent, something that can't wait, someone who needs something from you. Until one day your body stops asking permission. It just stops. Maybe it's a panic attack in the middle of a meeting. Maybe it's a complete emotional collapse over something trivial like running out of milk. Maybe it's your doctor telling you that your blood pressure, your cortisol levels, your blood work, all of it is screaming that you cannot continue like this. And even then, even when your body is literally begging you to stop, there's this voice in your head asking, but can I really afford to slow down? That's how deep the programming goes. We've internalized the idea that rest is something we have to earn, that we're only allowed to stop once everything is finished, once we've proven ourselves worthy, once we've achieved what exactly? The goalpost keeps moving. There's always another deadline, another expectation, another version of yourself you're supposed to become. Meanwhile, you're running on fumes, telling yourself you'll rest later, later when things calm down, later when you have time, later when you deserve it, but later never comes. Because you never feel like you've done enough. You tell yourself you'll rest when the project is finished. But when the project is finished, there's another one waiting. You tell yourself you'll take a break after the busy season, but there's always a busy season. You tell yourself you'll slow down when things calm down, but things never calm down. The goalpost keeps moving, and you keep chasing it, and the rest you promised yourself becomes a mythical thing, something other people get to do, but not you. Not yet. This is how burnout becomes normalized. This is how exhaustion becomes your baseline. You stop recognizing what it feels like to be rested because you haven't felt it in so long. You forget what your natural energy level is supposed to be. You think everyone feels this tired. You think everyone struggles this much. You think this is just what adulthood is. But it's not. What you're experiencing isn't normal. It's the result of a system that treats your energy like an infinite resource and your boundaries like optional suggestions. It's the result of being taught that your worth is measured by your output, and if your output slows down, you become less valuable. It's the result of productivity culture that has convinced you that rest is laziness and self-care is selfish. And the cruelest part? You've internalized it so deeply that you're now the one enforcing it. The system doesn't even need to push you anymore, you push yourself. You've become your own harshest supervisor, your own most demanding boss. You've set up cameras in your own mind, monitoring yourself, judging yourself, making sure you never stop performing. You check your email on vacation. You think about work during dinner. You plan tomorrow's tasks while you're supposed to be falling asleep. Your brain never stops running the productivity algorithm. Even when your body is technically resting, your mind is still working, still optimizing, still trying to squeeze more value out of every minute. The modern wellness industry has caught on to this exhaustion, of course. They've created an entire economy around selling rest back to you, meditation apps with premium subscriptions, sleep tracking devices that quantify your unconsciousness, weighted blankets marketed as therapeutic necessities. Relaxation has been productized, commodified, turned into something else you need to purchase and optimize. You don't just rest anymore, you practice evidence-based sleep hygiene. You don't simply take a break, you engage in mindful recovery protocols. Even the act of doing nothing has been rebranded as self-care and given a price tag, a routine, a set of best practices you're supposed to follow. And here's the insidious part. These tools often work. That meditation app genuinely helps you calm down. That sleep tracker provides useful insights. But they also reinforce the underlying problem. They turn rest into another project, another thing to be good at, another area where you can succeed or fail. You check your sleep score in the morning like you're checking a test grade. You feel guilty when your meditation streak breaks. You research the optimal room temperature, the best pillow height, the scientifically proven wind-down routine. Rest itself becomes work. The thing that's supposed to restore you becomes another source of pressure. This is what late-stage capitalism does to human needs. It takes something fundamental, something that should be as natural as breathing, and transforms it into a market. Then it sells you solutions to problems it created. You're exhausted because the system demands constant productivity. Then the system sells you rest, but only the kind of rest that makes you more productive. Recovery isn't valued for its own sake. It's valued because it improves performance. You're not supposed to rest because you're a human being who needs rest. You're supposed to rest because well-rested workers are more efficient. The entire framing is backwards. And when you internalize that framing, something dark happens. You start evaluating everything through the lens of productivity. Should I see my friends tonight? Well, am I recharged enough that it'll improve my work performance? Or will it drain me and make me less effective tomorrow? Should I pursue this hobby? Only if it teaches me a marketable skill or expands my network. Should I have children? Let me calculate the ROI on that decision. It's grotesque when you spell it out like that, but this is genuinely how millions of people think now. Every decision filtered through an economic calculus. Every moment justified by its contribution to your professional value. And we've built an entire wellness industry around this philosophy. Meditation apps that promise to boost your focus. Exercise programs marketed as productivity hacks. Sleep optimization techniques designed to help you squeeze more output from fewer hours. Even our rest has been colonized by the language of efficiency. The self-help section isn't about becoming a fuller human being anymore. It's about becoming a better employee. Happier, sure, but only insofar as happiness correlates with productivity. The moment you're happy in a way that doesn't serve your economic function, that happiness becomes suspect. It becomes laziness. This is why people feel guilty for enjoying things that serve no purpose. Reading fiction that won't help their career. Taking walks without fitness goals. Sitting quietly without meditating. We've been trained to see purposeless joy as a character flaw. And here's where it gets even more insidious. The system has convinced us that this is freedom. That we're entrepreneurs of ourselves, CEOs of our own lives, making strategic investments in our human capital. We use this language voluntarily. We're not being forced, we're optimizing. We're not being exploited, we're maximizing our potential. But entrepreneurship implies ownership. And you can't truly own yourself under this model because your value is always determined by someone else's needs. The market's needs. the algorithm's needs, the needs of whoever's buying your labor or attention or data. You're not an entrepreneur. You're a product that's been convinced it's a business. And the most insidious part is that this arrangement requires you to internalize all of the risk while externalizing none of the reward. Traditional employment offered something resembling a social contract, your time and effort in exchange for security, benefits, a structured path forward. The gig economy broke that contract and told you it was liberation. You absorb every cost, the car maintenance, the health insurance you can't quite afford, the retirement account you keep meaning to start, the taxes you owe quarterly but never quite save enough to cover, the algorithm changes that have your income overnight with no explanation, no recourse, no human being you can appeal to. Meanwhile, the platforms extracting value from your labor operate with the risk profile of a utility company and the profit margins of a tech monopoly. They've managed to build empires worth hundreds of billions of dollars while technically employing almost no one. It's a magnificent achievement of legal and semantic engineering, creating an entire service economy where the people providing the service aren't legally entitled to minimum wage, overtime, workplace protections, or any of the basic standards we spent a century fighting for. And when you complain, when you point out that you're earning less than minimum wage after expenses, that you're one car accident away from financial ruin, that you have no path to promotion or growth or security, you're told you're missing the point. You're told you lack entrepreneurial spirit. You're told to optimize better, hustle harder, diversify your income streams. The problem is never the system. It's always you, your failure to adapt, your inability to monetize efficiently, your lack of resilience in the face of an economy deliberately designed to extract maximum value while providing minimum stability. This is the con. They've taken the worst aspects of employment and self-employment and combined them into something new. You have all the insecurity and financial risk of running a business with none of the autonomy, equity, or upside. You have all the lack of control and disposability of being an employee with none of the protections or benefits. You're not building something. You're being used by something. And the most profitable innovation of the past 20 years has been convincing you that this extraction is actually empowerment, that precarity is freedom, that the dissolution of every structure that once provided economic security is actually an upgrade. They called it the gig economy because precariat sounded too much like what it actually is. They called it disruption because destruction of collective bargaining power doesn't fit on a venture capital pitch deck. And you believed it because you had to. Because the alternative was admitting that the structures being demolished weren't replaced with anything better, they were just demolished. That Uber didn't free you from taxi medallion monopolies, it created a new monopoly where the workers own nothing and can be deactivated by an algorithm. That Airbnb didn't democratize hospitality, it turned housing into a speculation vehicle and neighbors into income streams. The sharing economy, they called it. As if you were sharing anything except your car's depreciation and your apartment's wear and tear, while the platform extracted 30% for providing what exactly? An app? The same app pattern that's been replicated 10,000 times? The innovation wasn't technological. The innovation was regulatory arbitrage. The innovation was convincing millions of people to become small business owners without any of the benefits and all of the risk. You're not an employee, so no health insurance, no overtime, no workplace safety standards, no wrongful termination protections. But you're also not really a business owner because you can't set your prices, can't choose your customers according to your own criteria, can't build equity in anything except your star rating, which can be destroyed by a single bad day, a single unfair review, a single algorithmic hiccup. You're in a category specifically designed to have no rights. And they convinced you this was freedom, the most successful con in modern economics, making you grateful for the opportunity to drive your own car for less than minimum wage after expenses, while telling yourself you're an entrepreneur. Making you feel empowered because you cleaned someone's toilet on your own schedule, even though that schedule is determined by whether you can pay rent this month. This is what I mean by linguistic capture. They didn't just change the economy. They changed the words you use to understand the economy. And in doing so, they changed what you believe is possible, what you believe you deserve, what you believe is normal. Your grandfather had a pension. You have a side hustle. And you've been taught to see this as progress. We call it the gig economy like it's some kind of innovation, some liberation from the old ways. But here's what it really is. It's the atomization of work into its smallest, most disposable units. It's the return of piecework dressed up in an app interface. Your great-grandmother might have sewn garments at home paid by the piece with no guarantee of steady income. We looked at that arrangement and said, this is exploitation. We built labor laws to protect people from exactly this kind of precarity. And now we've rebuilt the exact same system, but you hail the ride through your phone instead of standing on a street corner. And somehow that makes it feel different. Modern. The language does so much work here. You're not an employee, you're a partner. You're not working, you're earning on your own schedule. You don't have a boss, you're being your own boss. And somehow, in this linguistic sleight of hand, you've given up sick days, vacation time, health insurance, unemployment protection, and any guarantee that tomorrow's algorithm won't cut your income by 30%. And when you point this out, when you say that maybe workers deserve basic protections, regardless of whether they're classified as employees or contractors, you're told you just don't understand innovation. You're stuck in the old economy mindset. You're afraid of disruption. But I understand disruption perfectly well. Disruption is just a euphemism. It means we found a way around the regulations that protected you. It means we discovered that if we change the language, we can change the obligations. It means we're doing something that would have been illegal 30 years ago, but we're doing it with venture capital and a clean website design. So somehow it's visionary. The gig economy isn't a bug in modern capitalism. It's a feature. It's the system working exactly as intended, finding its way back to maximum flexibility for capital, maximum precarity for labor. And the beautiful thing, from the system's perspective, is that it's convinced you this is freedom. The gig economy didn't emerge from nowhere. It wasn't some natural evolution of technology meeting market demand. It was carefully constructed, lobbied for, legally architected. Every classification fight, every proposition on a state ballot redefining what a worker is, every terms of service update that shifts more risk onto the individual, these are deliberate moves in a long game. And you can see the strategy clearly when you look at how these companies spend their money. Uber and Lyft together spent over $200 million on a single California ballot initiative to avoid classifying drivers as employees. $200 million. Not to improve the platform, not to increase driver pay, but to preserve a classification that lets them externalize costs. That's more than most of these drivers will earn in their entire lifetimes working for these platforms. That's how valuable your precarity is to them. The messaging was brilliant, of course. It was all about flexibility, about choice, about not letting the government take away your freedom to work when you want. And some drivers believed it. Some still do. Because when you're struggling, when you're barely making it, the fear of losing what little you have is powerful, even when what you have is fundamentally inadequate. This is the genius of the system. It makes you defend the very conditions that harm you. It convinces you that fighting for better is risky, that it might make things worse, that you should be grateful for the opportunity to wear out your car for below minimum wage. And it's spreading. Every industry is looking at the gig model and thinking, how can we apply this? How can we turn our workforce into independent contractors, shift our fixed costs into variable ones, make our labor as flexible and disposable as possible? You see it in healthcare, with hospitals increasingly using contract nurses, in education with the adjunctification of universities, in media where staff positions become freelance gigs, in logistics where delivery drivers become owner-operators responsible for their own vehicles, fuel and maintenance. Every sector finding new ways to disaggregate employment, to break apart the bundle of protections and benefits that used to come with a job. The gig economy presents itself as liberation. Be your own boss, set your own hours, work when you want. The marketing is all sunshine and autonomy, but talk to actual gig workers, read the research, look at the outcomes, and a different picture emerges. What you actually get is the illusion of flexibility masking the reality of precarity. Yes, you can theoretically work whenever you want, but you also have to work whenever you can, because there's no guaranteed income, no baseline security. You're constantly monitoring apps, constantly available, constantly hustling for the next gig. The flexibility runs one direction toward the platform's needs, not yours. The algorithms that assign work are black boxes. You don't know why you get certain jobs or don't. Your rating can drop for reasons outside your control: a customer having a bad day, traffic making you late, the arbitrary judgment of people who will never meet you. And that rating determines everything. What jobs you're offered, whether you're offered jobs at all, whether you can continue working on the platform. You have no one to appeal to. No process for dispute, no colleague solidarity. Just you and an algorithm, and the algorithm always wins. The economic math rarely works out the way it's advertised. Those hourly rates the platforms tout, they don't include the time spent waiting for jobs, driving to pickups, dealing with cancellations. They don't account for vehicle depreciation, insurance costs, phone bills, supplies. One comprehensive study of rideshare drivers found that after expenses, many were making below minimum wage. Some were effectively paying for the privilege of working. And there's no advancement, no career ladder, no path from gig to stability. You're as precarious on day 1000 as you were on day one. Actually more precarious because you're older, more worn down, with vehicles that have more miles and bodies that have more aches. This is the future of work that's being constructed. Not for everyone. The professional class still largely has traditional employment, still gets benefits and protections. But for an expanding segment of workers, this is what work is becoming. Atomized, surveilled, precarious, algorithm-mediated labor with all the risk and none of the security. And the most insidious part? The language around all of this has been carefully crafted to make it sound like liberation. You're not losing job security or gaining flexibility. You're not being denied benefits, you're becoming your own boss. You're not experiencing income volatility, you're embracing the entrepreneurial lifestyle. The vocabulary of freedom has been weaponized to describe a situation that for many workers represents the opposite. Greater precarity, less control, more stress. There's a researcher named Guy Standing who coined the term precariat, a combination of precarious and proletariat. It describes this growing class of workers who exist in a state of chronic economic insecurity. Not quite unemployed, but never quite securely employed either. Living in a perpetual state of uncertainty about where the next income will come from, whether they'll make rent next month, what happens if they get sick. And here's what makes the precariat different from historical working class struggles. The isolation. Factory workers could unionize because they worked together, saw each other, shared experiences. The gig economy atomizes workers. You're alone in your car, alone in your apartment accepting tasks, alone when the algorithm deactivates your account with no explanation. The collective power that workers historically used to improve conditions is structurally undermined by the very design of the platform economy. Meanwhile, the companies running these platforms have become some of the most valuable corporations in history. Uber, at various points, has been valued at over $70 billion. DoorDash went public at a valuation of over $60 billion. These are astronomical numbers built on a workforce that receives no equity, no profit sharing, no stake in the enterprise they're building with their labor. The wealth extraction is staggering when you examine it closely. The founders, early investors, venture capitalists, they became extraordinarily wealthy. Travis Kalanick, despite his controversial exit from Uber, walked away a billionaire. The people who believed in these platforms early, who had capital to invest, who had access to those exclusive funding rounds, they reaped rewards that most gig workers couldn't even conceptualize. Meanwhile, the drivers who actually made the service function, who turned the abstract idea into a working reality, who put wear and tear on their personal vehicles and logged countless hours navigating traffic and difficult customers, they got hourly rates that, after expenses, often fell below minimum wage. This isn't wealth creation, it's wealth transfer. From the many to the few, from labor to capital, from the people doing the work to the people owning the platform. And here's what makes it particularly insidious. The platforms convinced everyone this was empowerment. They wrapped exploitation in the language of freedom. Be your own boss. Work when you want. Control your destiny. These phrases became mantras, repeated so often they drowned out the uncomfortable questions about what was really happening. You're not your own boss when an algorithm can deactivate you without explanation. You're not in control when the platform unilaterally changes your pay structure. You're not free when you're trapped in a system where stopping work means immediate loss of income with no safety net whatsoever. The gig economy didn't create flexibility for workers, it created flexibility for companies. Flexibility to scale labor up and down based on demand without any of the costs or responsibilities of traditional employment. Flexibility to extract maximum value while providing minimum security. And we normalized it. That's perhaps the most troubling part. We as a society watched this transformation happen and largely accepted it as inevitable, even innovative. We celebrated these companies as disruptors, gave them billions in investment capital, lionized their founders as visionaries. And in doing so, we handed them not just our money, but our agency, our ability to choose where to shop, how to travel, what to watch, where to eat. These platforms didn't just capture market share, they captured the infrastructure of choice itself. Think about what that really means. When a company controls the marketplace, the delivery network, the payment system, and the data about what you want before you know you want it, are you really choosing? Or are you selecting from a menu designed to feel like choice while funneling you toward predetermined outcomes? This is the quiet part they don't say out loud. The algorithm doesn't serve you the best option. It serves you the most profitable option that you're still likely to accept. There's a difference, a significant one. And we're starting to see the cracks in this system now. The restaurants that can't afford the commission fees. The drivers who can't make a living wage. The small retailers whose businesses were destroyed, who can't get jobs at the warehouses that replace them because those jobs require standing for 10 hours straight with productivity tracked by the second. The young people who grew up during this transformation and entered a job market where entrepreneurship increasingly means driving your own car for someone else's company, or renting out your own apartment on someone else's platform, or selling things you make through someone else's marketplace that takes a cut of every transaction. The gig economy, they called it. The future of work, flexibility and freedom. What they meant was risk transferred entirely to the worker, benefits eliminated, labor laws circumvented, and all the profits flowing upward to platforms that own nothing but the software that connects people who need things with people desperate enough to provide them. And here's what makes it so insidious: they're not even hiding it anymore. The gig economy platforms talk openly about their business model in investor presentations and earnings calls. They describe their strategy as asset light, which sounds innovative until you realize what it actually means. It means they've found a way to run a taxi company without owning cars, a delivery service without employing drivers, a hotel chain without properties, a cleaning service without cleaning staff. They've stripped away everything except the algorithm and the app, and convinced the world this is progress. Uber's pitch to investors wasn't about transportation innovation. It was about regulatory arbitrage. They didn't invent a better way to get from point A to point B. They invented a way to operate a taxi fleet without following the rules that govern taxi fleets. And when cities pushed back, when they said, wait, you can't just ignore decades of transportation law, Uber flooded those cities with lobbying money, threatened to pull out and blame local politicians, and mobilized their users to pressure elected officials. They turned their own customers into unwitting soldiers in their war against regulation. And it worked, not because they had a better argument, but because they moved fast and broke things, mainly the lives of the drivers they claimed to be empowering. The same drivers who, in city after city, eventually organized to demand basic protections, only to discover that the companies had structured everything specifically to make collective action nearly impossible. Independent contractors don't get to unionize under most labor laws. That's not a loophole. That's the entire point. DoorDash takes this even further. They pioneered a tipping model where customer tips don't go entirely to drivers. They're used to subsidize the base pay that DoorDash itself should be providing. So when you generously tip your delivery driver, thinking you're helping someone who just biked through the rain to bring you dinner, you're actually just reducing DoorDash's labor costs. The company literally uses your generosity to pay less. And when journalists exposed this practice, DoorDash changed it, but only after public outrage, and only in ways that made the economics even worse for drivers in the long run. Here's the pattern. These companies launch with unsustainable economics, subsidized by venture capital, undercutting established competitors until those competitors collapse or capitulate. Then, once they've achieved market dominance, they raise prices on customers and squeeze workers until the unit economics finally makes sense for investors. The whole thing is a patient, well-funded wealth transfer from labor to capital, wrapped in the language of disruption and innovation. And the truly insidious part? They've convinced us that this extraction is actually liberation. That being your own boss means working 70 hours a week with no benefits. That flexibility means uncertainty. That being an entrepreneur means absorbing all the risk that corporations use to carry themselves. There's a term for this in economics: risk transfer. Corporations used to accept certain risks as the cost of doing business, training employees who might leave, maintaining inventory that might not sell, providing benefits during slow seasons. But the gig economy has perfected the art of transferring all of that risk downward while keeping all the profits at the top. You bear the risk of a slow Tuesday. You bear the risk of a car breakdown. You bear the risk of getting sick. You bear the risk of a customer dispute. The platform? They take their percentage regardless, rain or shine, profit or loss. Your profit or loss specifically. And here's what keeps me up at night: we're starting to accept this as normal. An entire generation is entering the workforce thinking that employment without benefits is just how things work now. That retirement planning is a personal failure if you can't figure it out on a 1099. That the social safety net their grandparents fought for was somehow naive or unsustainable. But it wasn't unsustainable. Corporate profits are at historic highs. Productivity has increased exponentially. The money is there. It's just been redirected. What changed wasn't the economic viability of treating workers like human beings. What changed was the balance of power. The gig economy didn't emerge because the old employment model stopped working. It emerged because someone figured out they could make even more money if they stopped pretending workers were anything other than variable costs to be minimized. And once that realization took hold, once one company proved the model worked, the floodgates opened. Because here's what Silicon Valley understands better than anyone. You don't need to invent something new. You just need to remove the friction that was protecting people from being exploited more efficiently. Uber didn't invent taxis. They just removed the part where drivers had employment rights. Airbnb didn't invent hotels. They just removed the part where housing was primarily for living in rather than speculation. Amazon didn't invent retail. They just removed the part where workers could use the bathroom. Each innovation, if you want to call it that, was really just the removal of a protection. Strip away the glossy presentations and the disruption rhetoric, and what you're left with is a simple equation. What could we get away with if we stopped calling people employees? And the answer turned out to be almost everything. Because once you're not an employee, the entire architecture of worker protection crumbles. Minimum wage doesn't apply. Overtime? Irrelevant. Health insurance? Good luck. Unemployment benefits? You were never employed. Workers' compensation? You're not a worker, you're an independent contractor. Right to organize? Can't organize what doesn't legally exist. It's brilliant, in the most cynical way imaginable. They didn't fight the labor movement. They didn't lobby to repeal labor laws. They simply created a category of work that existed outside those protections entirely. Why fight regulations when you can just declare yourself not subject to them? And governments let it happen. Courts let it happen. Because the rhetoric was so compelling. This wasn't exploitation, this was flexibility. This wasn't casualization, this was entrepreneurship. These weren't workers being stripped of rights, these were independent contractors choosing freedom. The language mattered immensely, because if you can control the language, you can control the perception. And if you can control the perception, you can reshape reality itself before anyone realizes what's been taken from them. And this wasn't abstract theory, this was operational practice. Consider what happened in Kashmir in August 2019. The Indian government didn't just revoke Article 370, it implemented what could only be described as a communication blackout of unprecedented scale in a democracy. Internet access was cut, mobile phones went silent, journalists were detained or denied entry, the information vacuum was total. But here's what made it particularly sophisticated. While Kashmir went dark, the narrative machinery outside Kashmir went into overdrive. News channels, social media, official statements all telling a very specific story about what was happening in a place where nobody could verify anything. The people living through the reality couldn't speak, but everyone else could speak for them. That's not information management. That's reality replacement. Or look at how farmer protests in India were reframed in real time. Hundreds of thousands of people, mostly elderly Sikh farmers, camping on the outskirts of Delhi in the middle of winter, protesting agricultural laws they believed would destroy their livelihoods. The protest was one of the largest in human history, yet the dominant narrative became about foreign interference, Khalistani separatists, urban Naxals. The protesters themselves, their actual concerns, their actual words became secondary to the story being told about them. Rihanna tweeted about it. The Indian government's response wasn't to address the protest, it was to launch a coordinated social media campaign with a specific hashtag promoted by dozens of celebrities, drowning out the original conversation. The message was clear: we will not just control the narrative, we will flood the zone until your narrative disappears. And it worked. Within weeks, the international attention faded. The protests continued for over a year, but the story that had broken through was contained, redefined, and ultimately neutralized in public consciousness. This is the playbook. Not censorship in the traditional sense, but something more subtle and more powerful: narrative saturation. The creation of so much noise, so many competing claims, so much emotional intensity, that truth becomes just another opinion in an infinite feed of content. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. We've built the infrastructure of saturation ourselves. Every platform we use, every device we own, every notification we allow there, all engines of overwhelm, designed not to inform but to capture attention at any cost. The algorithms don't care about truth. They care about engagement. And what drives engagement? Outrage, confusion, controversy. The feeling that you're missing something crucial if you look away for even a moment. So we're fed a constant stream of half-truths, misleading headlines, decontextualized clips, and emotional manipulation. Not because there's a conspiracy, but because that's what the system is built to amplify. Nuance doesn't trend. Complexity doesn't go viral. But outrage spreads like wildfire. And in that environment, truth doesn't stand a chance. Not because it's suppressed, but because it's drowned out. It becomes one voice among millions, all shouting at the same volume, all demanding your attention, all claiming to be the real story. We're living in an age where information is infinite but understanding is scarce, where we have access to more knowledge than any generation in history, yet we feel less certain about what's actually true. Because we've confused access with comprehension, data with wisdom, content with insight. The tragedy isn't that we can't find the truth. It's that we've lost the ability to recognize it when we do. We've been so conditioned to distrust, to question, to assume that everything is spin or agenda or manipulation, that even genuine expertise gets treated with the same skepticism as the most obvious propaganda. And that's the goal, isn't it? Not to make you believe lies, but to make you doubt everything. To create a world where all claims are equal, where expertise is just another opinion, where facts are whatever you choose to believe. Because in that world, power doesn't need to control the narrative. It just needs to ensure that no coherent narrative can ever form. This is the end game of information warfare. Not victory for one side or another, but the complete erosion of the concept of truth itself.